responding to former President Donald Trump saying, "I think a lot of people like it." That was his response when asked if he sees why some think his rhetoric violates democratic principles. His lengthy interview with Time magazine painting a dystopian portrait of America, illustrating in stark terms what another 4 years under Trump would bring to the U.S. It's a country where the military rounds up undocumented migrants, deports millions, holds the rest in detention camps. It's a country where the National Guard is sent into cities struggling with crime. It's a country where women's pregnancies are monitored by states. And it's a country where Justice Department officials who refuse to prosecute Trump's political enemies are fired. That country doesn't sound much like a democracy. If he doesn't win, he won't rule out political violence, saying, quote, "Depends on the fairness of an election." It depends, he says. Joining us now, former Trump White House Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Matthews. She's breaking with her party and voting for President Biden in November. And Sarah, you and I were speaking on January 6th. I remember that day you resigned as a result of what happened on January 6th. What's your reaction when he says he doesn't rule out political violence, saying it depends?
Yeah, he says it depends on the fairness of an election, but we know with Donald Trump that an election is only fair if he wins. So if the outcome is that he loses, then I believe that it's not even just that he's ruling out, or he's not ruling out political violence. To me, the way it read was it almost sounded like a threat of political violence if he loses.
Like he's holding it out there.
Exactly.
As a possibility. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that is really concerning because obviously we saw what happened on January 6th, and to think that something like that could happen again in this country. Obviously, Donald Trump lost the last election. There was zero evidence of it, but he spread all these conspiracy theories, which riled up his supporters and led to what we saw happen on January 6th. And so I think there could be a repeat of that.
Yeah, I mean, could we see something worse, do you think?
That's definitely a possibility that we could see something worse. Obviously, he's not the president this go around, and so I believe that Biden would have that situation under control and be prepared if that were to be the case.
And he says he was too nice last time, and this time it'll be different, saying of senior cabinet officials, we put this up on screen, "I let them quit because I have a heart." This is, people in the administration quitting. "I don't want to embarrass anybody. I don't think I'll do that again. From now on, I'll fire." He did fire many senior officials. We saw that happen. Sometimes he fired them by tweet and so on. But it sounds as though, and this is talked about in the Time article as well, is that he wants to, and people around him want to stock the administration with sycophants, people who are just willing to do whatever he wants, whatever he says. How worrisome is that?
Yeah, it's extremely worrisome because I think that competency and experience are going to be out the window in this article. He says that he wants to put loyalists in these positions of power, and a litmus test to secure a job would be that you believe that the 2020 election was stolen from him. And he says that. And so it is concerning to think there won't be people, I believe, of good character staffing him this go around. You're not going to have the John Kellys and Mark Espers who would push back on him. Instead, it's going to be a bunch of yes men and women who will do and say what he pleases. And I think in the last administration, we were able to dissuade him from a lot of bad policies by saying, oh, well, this could hurt your reelection chances. Yeah. If he is elected president again, that won't be a concern next time around. So I think that you're not really going to be able to steer him off of some of these bad policies, like such as family separation that we saw in his first term. Things like that, I believe he would go forward with because he wanted to do that during the first term.
Right. I mean, a lot of people have been saying throughout this campaign that we're not hearing enough about what Trump might do in a second term. Well, in this Time magazine article, you could just go point by point, policies and actions that he's talking about in a new administration, potentially led, and we're showing this on screen right now, deportation camps for migrants, allowing red states to monitor women's pregnancies, fire U.S. attorneys who don't carry out orders to prosecute someone. In this article, he talks about going after Joe Biden, pardons for January 6th attackers, and the list goes on and on. Again, you and I talked to one another on January 6th. You remember what it was like being inside the White House that day. Can you fathom Donald Trump going out and pardoning all of those people who attacked the Capitol that day?
No, and he likes to say that he's on the side of law and order, but then he's so willing to pardon these people that he calls them hostages and patriots. And it's really just disgusting to me because we saw the violence that happened that day. I think that political violence on either side of the aisle is unacceptable, and it is really upsetting then to see him and some of his other potential vice presidential picks, also kind of echoing that same language of calling these people hostages and being okay with Donald Trump pardoning them. And I think too, when you show that list of all of these actions that he outlined, because you're right, I don't think we're talking enough about what his future plans are. And I think that the focus needs to be there. There's been a lot of focus obviously on his past actions because of all the trials, but we need to be talking about what a second Trump term looks like. This is the closest we've gotten to seeing him outline it.
Preparedness office. You were there during the handling of COVID and so on.
Imagine. And so even if people are upset with Joe Biden and dissatisfied with him, I can't imagine that Donald Trump would be any better when you're looking at these actions he would want in a second term.
All right, Sarah Matthews, we'll continue this conversation. Thank you very much. And